Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Labour's forcing a binding vote in the Commons today, calling on the government to publish official assessments of the economic impact of Brexit. They were leaked yesterday. The vote would force the government to release the papers to the Brexit Select Committee, and the leak has prompted more soul-searching about Brexit on both sides of the House. So here's Elizabeth Glinker to explain. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, the civil servants have been beavering away, and the leaked analysis suggests that under 3 different models of a future relationship, the UK's GDP in 15 years' time would be between 2% and 8% lower than if Brexit had never happened. But Brexit Minister Steve Baker said the assessments didn't consider the implications of a bespoke deal that the government wants to do with the EU. And he said that regardless, government forecasts were always wrong, and wrong for good reasons. Now, Labour has led calls for publication, but the criticism was echoed by some Tories, including the Justice Minister Philip Lee, who said, "We can't just dismiss this and move on," adding that if the figures were anywhere near right, there'd be serious questions to be asked about the government's current Brexit policy. In the meantime, the former Brexit minister, Lord Bridges, criticised the government for having no answer to basic critical questions, also saying he feared that all we'd get by October, when both sides want a draft deal agreed, is more meaningless waffle. But it's not just Theresa May who's getting it from her own side. The Labour leadership has also been castigated in recent days for alleged fence-sitting on Brexit, with MPs like Alison McGovern and Heidi Alexander from the Labour Campaign for the Single Market arguing that the party has so far failed to reach a common and coherent position. Clearly a ringing endorsement. Andrew.
Thank you. Mark Field, these forecasts that were leaked, do we take them seriously?
Well, they're draft forecasts, and they only had forecasts in relation to an off-the-shelf model, as opposed to the bespoke model that the Florence speech.
Well, there were 3 different models were modelled.
Sure, but they were all off-the-shelf options that we've already got in play. And it's also interesting, given the range, from 2 to 8% drop. Imagine if it's, that's a 6-point range. 6 points the other way, but it makes a growth of 4%. So, I mean, it's a
So we shouldn't take them seriously?
It's not taking them seriously. I mean, I think
well, what's the point if we don't take them seriously?
I'm used day to day as a minister to getting a whole range of different opinions that come through. Sometimes they are will be draft documents. And I think the important thing is you use your own judgment. Don't slavishly take everything. But of course, you take seriously everything that comes through, but try and...
So should they be published when they're finalised drafts so that we can use our judgment?
We have a debate in the House today, and we, of course, as a government, will respect the view of the House. And I suspect that the humble address that is being beseeched upon the House today, that motion is likely to pass.
Is the government going to oppose it?
We're going to be abstaining on
You'll abstain?
The debate. We're going to play a full part in the debate. But,
so we'll get through then?
So we'll get through, and I think they will be published. But I think that's the big caveat, is these are draft, and they don't take account of what we regard as the desired outcome, which is to have a bespoke deal.
So are you going to publish the drafts, or are you going to wait and publish when the drafting's finished?
Well, it would probably make sense to try and get as much of the draft published at an earlier point as is possible. But again, the difficulty with this
is a mess, isn't it?
Well, it will look a mess because it will not look as though we've got a sense of a document that is an official government document that takes account of exactly what we're trying to achieve. And
we don't know we don't know what you're trying to achieve. That's part of the problem. George Bridges, a former Brexit minister, he said, "There's no bridge to a clear destination. There's just a gangplank into thin air."
Well, I'm very sorry.
And that's your own side.
I'm very sorry that he feels that way, because I think that the Florence speech from the Prime Minister last year made it very clear that we are thinking, we are a large country, a large nation within the EU. The notion, therefore, of having a deal that is the same as Norway with a population of 5 million, or Switzerland with a population of 9 million, or 340,000 in Iceland is a non-starter. We want a specific bespoke deal.
Right.
Now, obviously,
so what should that consist of?
Well, there's a whole range of areas it's going to go in obviously financial services, close to my own heart as the member for the City of London. You know, the importance of London as a wholesale.
Sure. So what do we want in financial services? What does the government want in financial service? What should we want as a country?
This is open to a lot of negotiation, and whenever I speak,
I know that, but in every negotiation you make a demand.
No, we don't make a demand. We try and compromise.
But you put your position. So what's your position?
And we closely work, and I'm not going to be announcing what our position is on this programme, not least because this is a fluid situation. I mean, the reality is when I speak to people in the city, they are used to the idea of having a couple of all-night sessions before a deal finally gets done. We are going to be having a debate and discussions on this matter, I fear, right through till March of 2019. But I don't think we should. I don't think we should be fearful of that. I mean, that is the way in which negotiations are done.
But on
We've seen it time and again with the EU summits.
So many important areas, you cannot tell us what the government's end goal is. Not what you will necessarily get entirely in the negotiations, but what you're striving for. You can't tell us.
Listen, if we started telling everyone exactly what the end goal was, you're giving away your negotiation.
Well, you have to tell the other side, otherwise you can't negotiate.
Of course there's give and take, and a huge amount of negotiation has gone on. And listen, if I were in the studio 2 months ago, Andrew, you'd be saying, listen, it was all calamitous, everything was going to collapse. Suddenly, just before Christmas, we got through stage one. There was a sense of making progress on the important areas that needed to get decided before stage two began.
Labour's pushing for this economic assessment to be published. Why do you put so much store on forecasts from people whose previous forecasts were so far out?
Well, we think if the government has commissioned this work, that it must be putting some store by it. We expect it to be of a reasonable quality, especially given that initially we were told that it was done in excruciating detail, then we were told it didn't exist, then something was published which was at best superficial. So now we find there is something, thanks to BuzzFeed, and we want to know what it is.
That's the site that leaked it.
Yeah, I mean, we
will
want
you
to know what there is.
much store
well, we don't
by
know
them?
until
I mean,
we see it.
These are the people, the Treasury.
Yes.
They said that unemployment would rise. This was their forecast. If we voted to leave, unemployment would rise between 500,000 and 820,000. That was the range. And it would be a quick rise.
Yes,
the 500,000 would probably happen before Christmas of 2016. What actually happened?
Well, what we want these papers.
No, what actually happened?
Well, we all know what's happened since.
Well, just tell us for those that don't.
That isn't the point. The point.
Well, surely it is. They made the fact is
that
unemployment continued to fall.
If you take that argument, then you will never bother looking at any forecasts, any evidence. We're saying we want the forecasts and we want to be able to interrogate them and challenge them. And if we think that the data used underlying them is incorrect or insufficient or been over-interpreted, we'll be able to debate that. But at the moment, all we have is a partial leak. And the Brexit ministers are saying, well, this is a partial leak, it doesn't really matter, it's not that important. And in the very same breath is using the information.
We are,
of course.
Let's come on to Labour's position on the end state,
yes.
because the government is being criticised for not being clear, and I've just been asking questions about that. You were asked on ITV about Labour's position on what it wants, and you said, I do think that people are capable of getting their heads around this. What we're saying is that we want the benefits of the single market, but that we're uneasy about accepting all of the laughter. We want the benefits of the single market. Our constituents have said very clearly in voting to leave that there are aspects of membership they're not content with. That's why it's a negotiation. This was you clarifying Labour's position.
That was perfectly clear.
Would you like to have another go?
No, I think that did the job very, very well. What I'm saying there is that we want the benefits of the single market and the customs union, but to ignore the fact that there was a clear message from many people about free movement of labour would be just to stick hands over our ears and pretend we...
All right, so is it your position that we should stay as members of the single market?
Well, without getting too legalistic about it, we are going to need a new treaty. So you can't just stay as members of the single market, because we are members by virtue of our membership of the EU, which ends at the end of March next year. So we need a new treaty. Now,
but should that new treaty include membership of the single market?
It won't include membership of the single market, because it will be a new treaty and we won't be members in the same way that we are now. How closely we dock to the single market, for want of a better way of putting it, that needs to be negotiated. But there are some aspects of membership that I don't think the country is content with and that we would want to negotiate around.
So how is that different from the government's position?
Because the government's taken membership of the single market and the customs union off the table, and the Labour Party hasn't.
Well,
and we've said,
so you might still be members of the single market?
And we've said on transition that we will accept a transitional period on the same terms that we have now. Now, that is very different to what the government is saying, although I will say it's very hard to square the circle of the end of the phase one negotiations and the very serious, solemn commitments that were made there, and the Florence speech, which says we're not going to be part of these institutions. How can you have it both ways?
I still don't have any idea whether Labour thinks we should stay members or not after the transition period. On the transition period, Minister, will we stay members of the single market during the transition period?
I don't know. I mean, that is going to be something that we're going to be debating during the course of it. It is possible.
The government's about to begin negotiations. Don't you need to have your position determined?
You're quite right. Beginning the negotiation, not ending the negotiation, but beginning the negotiation.
But you can't begin negotiations if you don't want to know what you're going to ask.
No, the truth is, Andrew, I think it's very clear that what will command a majority of the public is something that is compatible with the vote to leave the European Union. That means we cannot remain members of the single market or the customs.
But during the transition?
After the transition. After the
right.
transition. So that is what is going to be compatible. But we obviously, I think the public out there want to see as many of the benefits and advantages.
Well, you're both saying that.
Have.
But at least Labour has been, I think, still very unclear at the end state. But clearer than you are on the transition, because you would stay in the single market for the transition as members and you stay in the customs union. Will we stay in the customs union for the transition?
Well, I think there will have to be some issue around Ireland. I mean, I don't think any of us deny after we joined the EEC in 1973 at the height of the Troubles, Ireland and the UK together, the interconnection between our two countries remains as strong as ever. There will need to be some, I mean, dare I say, maybe fudge deal, but something in relation to Ireland that will allow.
But the cabinet.
I'm very pleased to hear you say that.
But the cabinet subcommittee was meant to
the
discuss that
stuff
on Monday, and the papers were withdrawn.
Right.
So we still don't know. Yeah, just one final thing: will free movement, as we currently have it, continue for the transition period?
I don't know. I suspect
you don't know.
I don't know because it is.
You are in the Foreign Office.
It is part of the. It is part of the negotiation.
No. But how a negotiation? I mean, I've done negotiations. I don't know if you have, but I have.
I was a lawyer.
So how it works is one side says, "This is what we would like," and the other side says, "This is what we would like," and then you negotiate to try and bring the two sides together. But if you don't tell us this is what we would like, how can you negotiate?
I think there is no settled position on the issue of free movement.
You haven't resolved that yet?
No, there's no settled position, and it will be part and parcel of the negotiations.
So the government hasn't yet. The referendum was in June 2016. You triggered Article 50 coming up for a year ago. You've done phase one of the negotiations. Phase two is about to start. And you still cannot tell us your position on some of the most fundamental issues.
No, there's no settled position on the transition period at which point free movement, as we currently have it, will end. It will end. It will end at some point between 2019 and the end of the transition period.
We'll have to end this conversation, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Probably to your relief.
I want us to go to our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan, who's in the House of Commons this evening. So, Carl, is the government's U-turn on publishing the leaked Brexit papers another sign of weakness, do you think?
That's precisely what it is. The government has spent the last 2 days rubbishing these reports and saying they shouldn't be published. Labour said that they would force the matter to a vote today, and knowing that Conservative rebels might well join Labour, the government rolled over and said, oh, do you know what, yes, we'll let you see them, before a vote had even been cast. So MPs in the coming days will be able to go into a room and read them. They won't be able to take them away, but they'll be able to read these reports. We know the headlines of the various types of Brexit that were considered. They all damage economic growth in some way or another. We also know that, of course, they don't consider the bespoke Brexit deal that the government says it wants. The reason for that is the government hasn't decided exactly what that bespoke deal will look like, which in turn is another symptom of Theresa May's political weakness and inability to impose her political will on her government.
Carl Dinnan in the Commons, thank you.
But first, leaked government documents indicating that Brexit in any form will be negative for the UK economy are to be published. The government had said they were a partial analysis that hadn't been signed off by ministers and shouldn't be made public. But as Labour MPs brought forward a motion to force disclosure to Parliament, the government said it would no longer oppose them being released. Our reporter Paul McNamara is at the House of Commons now. Paul.
Evening, Chris. Yes, everyone's expecting quite a tense day here before a testing vote as to whether or not these reports would be officially released. In the end, it turns out most of the drama was happening behind the scenes, with enough Tory MPs letting the government know that if it came to a vote, they would either abstain or indeed vote with Labour, forcing quite an embarrassing defeat. In the end, Brexit Minister Robin Walker said they would be released, but with a few conditions.
We will provide the analysis to the Select Committee for exiting the European Union and all members on a strictly confidential basis. This means we will provide a hard copy of the analysis to the Chair of the EU Select Committee. And a confidential reading room will be available to all members and peers to see a copy of this analysis once those arrangements can be made.
The emphasis there on confidentiality. Tory MP Anna Soubry today saying that is a farce. The only reason that we're here today having this vote was because the details of these impact assessments have already been leaked to the internet. Now, all in, this has been an embarrassing episode for the government. Firstly, because the detail of those assessments says that however we leave the EU, it will have a negative impact on the UK economy. Brexiteers, of course, they argue the numbers, and they say the reports don't take into consideration the government's preferred method, a bespoke model. But ultimately, the government has argued for 48 hours that these papers should not be released. Theresa May herself said it would be wrong. And then finally today, they rolled over.
Paul McNamara.
Theresa May met China's President Xi today on the latest stage of her trip. Certain corners of the UK were celebrating after the Prime Minister used the trip to secure the Scotch whisky trademark for another decade. But away from trade, it's been a week of politics, dominated by Brexit there and here. Today, battle lines were drawn between London and Brussels when Mrs May announced she'd be tough on migrants entering Britain during the transition period. But tonight, the battle was a little closer to home as a row exploded with her government. Our political editor, Nick Waters, here, yet another row.
Yes, and interestingly, a story tonight in the FT saying that Theresa May's advisers are looking into whether the UK could work up a customs deal with the European Union that would cover goods. Now, it's important to say Downing Street are saying this is not going on, and I spoke to one Brexit minister.
The European Union wants this, of course.
Yeah, and I spoke to one Brexit minister, Brexit-leaning minister, who said that if you do that, that's not a coherent trade policy because you would not be able to sign your own trade deals. Now, this plays into that row that you were mentioning about the customs union and this fear amongst Brexiteers that civil servants are skewing evidence and skewing reports to walk ministers towards one conclusion, which is we have to stay in a customs union. Now, Steve Baker, who's the Brexit minister, appeared in the Commons this afternoon to sort of give some support to that view. And around the time that he was speaking, Sir Jeremy Hayward, who is the Cabinet Secretary, popped up on Twitter. It looks like he was responding to something that Steve Baker said a few days ago when he said that civil servants are always wrong. And this is what Sir Jeremy said, talking to a number of civil servants, proud to address civil servant analysts yesterday. Every day their great work supports the government in making evidence-based policy and helps deliver better public services across the country. Now, Steve Baker apologised this evening for his comments in the Commons today, and he indicated that he'd sort of misquoted Charles Grant, the director of the Centre for European Reform, who he said had given the impression that civil servants were sort of skewing things in the direction of a customs union.
So, we're in a situation where this is what we think is going on, but what else is happening behind the scenes?
Right, there is real concern amongst Brexit backbenchers and Brexit-leaning ministers that after that leak to BuzzFeed, which showed that the UK civil service are saying that every option in Brexit makes us poor, they have two big fears. One, as a Eurosceptic Tory said to me, are the civil service out of control and doing their own thing? Or has Theresa May given them authority to do this and not telling anyone? And this is what a Eurosceptic Tory told me. If that is what the Prime Minister is doing, that is how you kick off a civil war in one easy step.
Nick, thanks very much indeed.